It begins with a strategy that did not aim to defeat armies, but to conquer imagination before battle began. In a world without fast communication or fixed borders, fear traveled faster than any messenger. Mountains, rivers, and distance were not obstacles to power. They were channels through which reputation moved. Stories of destruction were designed to echo far beyond the battlefield. Violence was not spontaneous or emotional. It was planned with audience in mind. Every act was chosen for how far its memory would spread. The objective was never just to win one city. It was to ensure 10 others never resisted. Entire regions learned obedience without ever seeing an Assyrian soldier. Control was achieved mentally before it was enforced physically. Borders formed first in fear, not on land. The Assyrians understood that invisible power invites rebellion. Their empire stretched across terrain too vast and difficult to control through manpower alone. Garrisons could not stand everywhere. Patrols could not watch every pass. Instead, they made authority visible everywhere at once. Punishments were public and unforgettable. Cities that resisted were destroyed in ways meant to be remembered for generations. Survivors were often spared deliberately so they could carry stories outward. Fear became a governing system, not a side effect of war. People obeyed not because soldiers stood nearby, but because memory stood everywhere. Even distant lands felt watched. Resistance collapsed before it could organize. Assyrian brutality was not chaos. It was a language spoken fluently across cultures. Executions were staged so witnesses could never forget them. Leaders were punished not only to remove them, but to turn them into warnings. Cities were destroyed as examples, not outbursts. Each conquered place became a message to the next. Violence explained consequences more clearly than diplomacy ever could. Rumors crossed mountain passes faster than official messengers. Fear required no translation. It carried meaning instantly. The empire communicated power without speeches or treaties. Understanding came automatically. Silence followed. Mountains amplified fear instead of stopping it. Narrow passes forced travelers into shared paths where stories spread uncontested. Merchants, refugees, and envoys repeated the same warnings again and again. Each retelling sharpened terror. Distance did not weaken fear, it intensified it. Borders became psychological zones rather than physical lines. Crossing into Assyrian influence felt irreversible. Geography itself enforced obedience. The land carried reputation outward like an echo that never faded. Control did not require constant military presence. The terrain itself became an ally. Reputation guarded the edges better than walls ever could. Many cities chose submission long before Assyrian armies appeared. Gates were opened without siege. Tribute was offered before demands were issued. Leaders calculated survival over pride. Fear removed the need for prolonged warfare. Expansion became terrifyingly efficient. Past destruction did the work of future campaigns. Memory replaced manpower. Conquest often occurred mentally before it happened physically. Resistance felt irrational when outcomes seemed inevitable. Submission became the safest strategy. Power expanded without bloodshed because bloodshed had already been remembered elsewhere. Fear made expansion fast, but it made stability dangerously fragile. The Assyrians saved resources by frightening enemies into obedience rather than fighting them repeatedly. But compliance born from terror carried no loyalty. Cities obeyed outwardly while waiting inwardly. Stability depended on constant reminders of power. Terror could never rest. The moment fear weakened, resistance returned. Violence had to be renewed to stay effective. This kept the empire in a permanent state of tension. Control was vast, but shallow. Authority existed everywhere, but trust existed nowhere. Power spread rapidly, yet it rested on ground that could crack at any moment. Assyrian borders were enforced long before soldiers ever set foot there. Entire regions understood the cost of defiance without seeing an Assyrian banner. Stories of punishment moved faster than armies, carried by traders, refugees, and envoys who repeated them to survive. Fear acted like an invisible garrison, stationed permanently in the minds of local rulers. Distance offered no protection because reputation crossed it effortlessly. Mountains did not isolate resistance, they amplified warning. Local leaders governed themselves cautiously, not out of loyalty, but to avoid becoming examples. Obedience became preventative rather than reactive. In this way, borders were not lines drawn on land, but thresholds of fear drawn in thought. Crossing them meant surrendering hope of resistance before it could even form. Over time, terror began to lose the power of surprise, and that shift was fatal. Repeated brutality no longer stunned populations, it hardened them. Communities learned what Assyrian punishment looked like and discovered they could endure it. Fear slowly transformed into resentment. Instead of isolating resistance, terror connected it. Former rivals recognized shared suffering and common enemies. Once fear became predictable, it stopped commanding obedience. The belief in inevitability weakened. Control relies on uncertainty, and uncertainty was disappearing. The same violence that once silenced entire regions now gave them clarity. Terror stopped paralyzing and started motivating. The strategy that built the empire began to undermine it. The same geography that once spread fear now carried rebellion in return. Mountain passes that had echoed warnings now echoed coordination and planning. Refugees who once carried stories of terror now carried messages of defiance. Distance that once protected Assyrian reputation now slowed Assyrian response. Armies could not move fast enough to suppress simultaneous unrest. Reputation alone could not replace exhausted manpower. Control weakened first at the edges, where delay magnified vulnerability. Borders that once felt absolute became negotiable. Geography shifted from ally to liability. The land that once enforced fear now exposed its limits. An empire built on fear must remain constantly present or collapse all at once. The Assyrian system demanded unbroken pressure, because nothing else held it together. There was no shared identity binding rulers and subjects. No loyalty to fall back on during crisis. Every pause in terror was interpreted as weakness. Droughts, defeats, or delays instantly triggered unrest. Administrators ruled cautiously, knowing their authority existed only as long as fear remained fresh. Power could not be delegated safely, because trust did not exist. Central control tightened, draining resources and exhausting armies. Fear required constant renewal, and renewal consumed the empire itself. Expansion and collapse followed the same logic. Both were accelerated by terror. What made the empire strong also made it brittle. Fear can build borders faster than treaties, but it cannot keep them standing. The strategy perfected by the Assyrian Empire proved that reputation could replace walls, garrisons, and diplomacy for a time. Geography became a psychological weapon, turning mountains into carriers of terror. Yet fear has a ceiling. Once its shock fades, it reverses direction. Memory that once enforced obedience begins to fuel rebellion. Borders enforced by intimidation do not fall outward under attack. They collapse inward under pressure. Mountains remember both threats and resistance. The Assyrians turned fear into a weapon of control, but also into a countdown. Power built on intimidation always reaches the same end. When fear stops working, nothing else is left to hold the empire together. Do you think fear is the strongest tool a state can use to control borders? Can power built on intimidation ever survive when fear begins to fade? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Explore more strategies where empires ruled minds before land.